Well, so I'm going to be a little transparent about this topic, first of all, and tell you this. So I grew up this whole topic and even preparing for it this week and digging into some of the what do we know from a little bit of science around this. How do we think about this in terms of a whole conversation about influence? I think it's a challenging thing to think about. One of the reasons it's challenging for me is to be fully transparent is also when Megan's showing that slide with my bio on it. One of the reasons that we do that is because I like to know who people are. I mean, personally, when I hear someone talk or I meet them, I actually like to know what people's business is about. I want to know, like, what are the ins and outs of your business. But I will tell you that this is a tension for me, even digging into this topic at a personal level, because I grew up with a dad who would oftentimes say this. So imagine being an 8-year-old, and this is a common message in your home: be careful how you read your own press clippings. Okay, so I don't even think I knew what he meant as an 8-year-old. Like, I'm like, what? James, you're laughing right now, but it's funny like, what does an 8-year-old think about? But I kind of knew. My dad said stuff to me, by the way, that was way over my head all the time. Like, one time he came in and I knew I was doing something wrong, but he walks in the room and he goes, "Robert, taboo." And I'm like, what does that mean? The only relationship I had to was like the Brady Bunch. If any of you ever saw the episode where they go to Hawaii, it's like, so my dad would say things like this. But that concept of being careful how you read your own press clippings, I think, is interesting, because it was this idea of being thoughtful around how you understand your influence. And I think there's a deeper story, of course, in my own WiLD story around what that's all from, how it connects into a lot deeper things around the context in which my parents were and that I grew up in. But it is a challenging personal topic to even prepare for. So this is what I want to just throw this out, because influence is still a real thing. It's happening every day in our world, all the time. From my perspective, it's not something that is necessarily bad. In fact, it's something that is necessary, but it could be used possibly for good or evil in our world. And so here's the question I want to start with is this: what would change if you were more aware of the influence you have and the way you're influenced by others? What would change if you were more aware of the influence you have and the way you're influenced by others? And out of the gate, one of the things I want to suggest to you that's been a really important part of our work, and some of you have heard me say this like I'm a broken record, is that our presence is a powerful thing. And when I say our presence, I mean how we are with people matters. And I would suggest to you that it matters just as much or more than anything we do or decisions we make. And I mean because our presence impacts other people's decisions and it impacts our own decisions. And when I say presence, I mean literally how you show up, which is affected by many, many things, has a profound impact on the experience of other people. And becoming aware of how we're showing up is a powerful thing as well. So I'm just going to throw that out there. And let me tell you, I want to define something out of the gate that is, before we get into influence, like, what does this have to do with whole and intentional leader development? And so I want to frame this up. Let me tell you how I would describe. I wrote this again. I've written this in multiple places, but this is the way I define what I would describe as a whole and intentional leader. This is a leader who is paying attention to their whole capacity and development as a person. They're clear about their convictions and willing to edit and change, developing a deeper sense of awareness of their strengths, their blind spots, their experiences, and the calling on their lives for the sake of those they lead. WiLD leaders, that's my short version of that. Whole and intentional leaders are people on a mission to become better versions of themselves for the sake of those within their influence. For the sake of those within their influence. WiLD leaders are those who will lead others with intent, discernment, care, and conviction. Those with the courage to lead strong while also maintaining the sacrificial character necessary to edit and change at the deepest level. WiLD leaders are leaders aspiring to wholeness and growth for the sake of those they lead. And influence plays a role in this. I think it's a really necessary thing for us to understand, because it's one thing to think about influence leading to authority than leading to short-term gains. Like, that's kind of that's a common thing, right? Influence leads to power and authority, leads to short-term gains. And it's another thing to think about influence leading to responsibility and then leading to long-term impact. Like, what would that look like? So let's dig in. How is influence defined? Fascinating, y'all. It's just so fun to strip things down. This is the definition of influence. Kind of blew me away and made me feel a tremendous sense of responsibility. The capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. All right, just think about that for a second. The capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. And here's what's fascinating. I'm not going to get into this because we as a WiLD team were like, what does this next part mean? Or the effect itself. So it's like the capacity to affect the effect itself, which is fascinating and kind of put your brain into these cycles of thinking about like all kinds of things. And what's fascinating about influence from that perspective, so that's a huge thing. If we have influence, it's the capacity to have an effect on the character, the development, and the behavior, what someone's actually going to do of someone or something, or the effect itself. What's interesting about this from a kind of a market perspective, and is that there was a book written called Blown to Bits a few years back, and it talked about this reality that in the past, we had to make decisions about a couple of things. There were two main things when it came to marketing. And these two things were richness and reach. And so if you were marketing a product, you had to make a decision about whether you were going to reach a lot of people with a less rich message, or a more rich message was going to go to fewer people. And the author was talking about this reality that value proposition has been blown to bits because, and he talked about the demise of the newspaper industry, talked about the real estate industry, talked about the music industry, where suddenly with the onset of big data, even before big data existed, this book was written before that, those two things kind of they no longer mattered as much. And what's fascinating today in terms of influence is that we're so far beyond the richness and reach conversation, because now we're talking about exactly customized messaging and influence. So it makes me think about, like, what are we responsible for in that? I have one silly example I'm going to show you. I was debating whether I was going to show you in that conversation Megan was producing. So this is what creeps me out. So a shoe company started creeping into my Instagram feed. And I was like, never heard of these shoes. Paige Westcott, Dr. Westcott, just look at this. These are the shoes. Okay, what's creepy about this is that circle, because that's the WiLD logo. And I'm like, some little bot is snooping around and saw this thing on my wall behind me, maybe, I don't know where, and found a brand that puts that stupid thing on the shoe, and then guess who loves the shoes and bought them? All right, so I'm just saying, like, it's a little crazy how this works in our world today. And it's interesting because I don't believe that the fundamentals of influence have changed or what it means. But I would say that, you know, I always struggle with this, like whether change is occurring faster. I don't know. I think there's certain pieces of that are changing faster. I kind of hate it when we throw out that statement all the time that the only thing that's not changing is change itself. Or, you know, it's like, because it's like, I don't know that human beings are actually any different. I would say that my experience that this is probably true, that currently the intent to get us to make a decision without thinking has always been there. Because I was a part, remember Ronco ads? Some of you are old enough. I don't remember it. Like, it's just weird, like to push us toward decision fast, but now it's faster and more sophisticated. It's just, it's like crazy sophisticated. And the challenge with today's influence is that you don't have to pay attention to find something that is customized to you that you not only may not need, but that may actually cause damage. And that in itself creates another escalating problem of two possible outcomes. One is blind action with no intent. And two is a distrust of influence in general. Do you hear me? Like, I'm troubled by people who are blaming the system and blaming power as the problem. Power is a reality. We need power and influence to change things. So I think it's dangerous to say we don't. Like, when people go like, power is a bad thing, leaders don't need power, I would be like, come on. Like, we're like, power to influence power structures and those kinds, it's necessary in our world. We all have influence. We all have this. And so I just want to say a couple things about influencing and being influenced, because I think there's two sides of this. All right. So a couple of things to think about. And again, those of you that know me, and just give a nod, like, I don't have this all figured out. Please know that I'm with you in this conversation. And I just don't believe in people who say, like, let me tell you the rules of influence. Like, come on. Okay. So here we go. Here's some ideas. Influence is necessary, but not sufficient to being a leader. It's a necessary component. Do all leaders need influence? I would say likely yes. And they need to understand their capacity and how they have it. Without the capacity to motivate and inspire change and movement, it's difficult to get momentum on much of anything. All right, so understanding that is important. Leading for the sake of influence is different than understanding our influence and seeking to increase it. I think we do live in an interesting space where we literally have a job title called influencer. I think that's a little weird. It's a little over the top on the side of influence, but I know that it works. So I don't know. I'm not saying any of you are influencers, don't jump off, because I'm not saying you're bad. I'm just like, it's crazy. Our world has shifted in some ways. Influence is necessary, but not sufficient for leaders. Influence requires an awareness of responsibility. As we gain influence, we also gain accountability, or I hope we would. A courageous and sacrificial leader, in my mind, will be aware of that. If we believe we aren't responsible for our influence, I think we become a little bit blind and maybe a little narcissistic. I've had people say to me, like, I don't really like this. These are public speakers who are paid a lot. I don't really like to speak. I don't really care about the influence I have. I'm like, really? I think there can be danger and a lack of awareness around that. I don't know. That's just my take. And the last thing is also, influence isn't all about us, but it's partially about us. That awareness keeps us humble, but it also maintains a conviction and a courage necessary to step forward. So I think the other reality is that it is partially about us. I think that's okay. Some of you know this about me. Like, one of my primary learning motivators is influence. So, and I know the story behind that is when I prepare for Fridays and get a chance to talk with you, and every time I open my mouth, there's a possibility I might influence one of you, which scares the heck out of me. But it's like, but I would also tell you this, that I also know that I learn when I'm preparing for this. And so that's been an interesting thing for me to understand in my own world. Now, on the other side, on the concept of being influenced, I think this is also, let's turn it around for a second. Being influenced is necessary for emotional and developmental readiness. Like taking feedback. Being influenced is hard because it requires us to pay attention to what others need from us. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to do that. Being too influenced, and we become chameleons or peacemongers, being defined by the whims of others, the emotions of others. Too little, and we become selfishly defined by whoever we think we are. Like, I love that statement when we ask the question, who do you think you are? Becomes, I'm me, so deal with me. And it's like, well, come on. So I think this maintaining our capacity to be influenced is so important. So here's a couple of things so some of you are like, so give me some steps. So here's my attempt at a couple of steps that I think might be important. So how to influence, maybe in a whole and intentional way. Number one, become aware of your presence as the most powerful form of influence. I was with a leader this last week who is really struggling in a significant size business that is struggling financially and is also struggling because of lawsuits. And this is a leader who said, when this person got real, said, courage is the thing I need. And we talked about courage in the face of fear. And we talked about what would be different if you had more courage in the experience of others, if you showed up with more courage in the experience of others. And that's just an example of that, becoming aware of that presence and that matters, and thinking more deeply about it. The other thing is, state your convictions with great care for people and not ideas. State your convictions with great care for people and not ideas. There's one thing that is fascinating about conviction. People follow it almost to a fault. And so I think for those of us that are reluctant to state our convictions, understand what matters to us, I think it can be important to understand what matters to us and communicate it, because people get influenced. They're motivated to follow into those convictions. Here's my third thing, invite through questions that open up alignment. So one of the things it's interesting about seeing people in influence is, think about this. Think of the questions that people have asked you over your lifetime that have changed the trajectory of your life forever. I'll tell you two of mine. These are questions that these people, when they asked me, did not know the answer to it. One of the questions was, is Rob ready for a change? I'm not going to tell you the context. I'm just telling you that question changed my life. Another question, have you talked to your wife about it yet? That was another question that there's a whole context and story behind that. But these moments of questions that have changed our lives, there was this invitation that had this unbelievable influence on us, on our capacity. And then the last one is this, on the influence side, is buy-in for the long haul. Deeper influence is not a number of likes or views, but creating depth of change in others that inspires hope in the hopeless, direction in the lost, forgiveness for the guilty, and love for the lonely. I think there's something like the long haul of influence is thinking about our presence in the world. What is the long-term impact that we may not even fully see all the fruit of in the end, but to even step back and look at influence from that perspective, how does it change your perspective? And I have this litmus test at the end of this. I said, this is on the influence side. For the sake of what or whom are you seeking influence? What is the honest answer? Keep asking until your influence seeking becomes 75% about them and 25% about you. I don't know what the right formula is, but it's like, you know, like keep asking the questions. Then on the how to be influenced side, on a whole and intentional kind of way. Number one, how to be influenced. Identify your convictions and then argue against yourself. Why am I wrong? I think is an interesting start. Number two, invite honest feedback that sometimes bites from those who care. There's some faces on here I'm looking at right now who have given me feedback that was, it didn't mean to bite, but it just felt like it did. Okay. Number three, understand your barriers to being influenced. I think this is an important factor. Becoming aware intentionally and choosing a posture of sacrifice, grace, and forgiveness. So I think understanding our own personal barriers to being influenced by others, and I know mine. I don't know that I just being aware of it, I think is a start. And then the last thing is this, to buy in for the long haul. On this, in the same way with number four, with influencing. Being influenced is a process of starts and stops, failures and setbacks, and a long-term openness to seeing others and changing for their sake. And then finally, my litmus test on the being influenced side is, are we willing to seek input, edit, and change for the people within our sphere of influence? Are we willing to edit, to seek input, and to change? And what is the honest answer? Keep asking until our influence seeking becomes 50% yes and 50% no. Because I think there are things about us that we're not, that maybe aren't supposed to change. And there's maybe at least half of it that might, maybe if we maintain that openness. So I hope that gives some context for a great conversation. Y'all, let's get wiser together as we break out into these conversations, and let's go, Megan.